The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Windsor Castle as Princess Charlotte walked quietly along the stone pathway. Her small hands clutched a book of fairy tales, her favorite escape from the formal world that surrounded her every day. At 9 years old, she had already learned that being a princess meant following countless rules, attending boring ceremonies, and always smiling even when she felt sad. Charlotte loved these early morning walks because they gave her precious moments alone. Well, almost alone. She could see her protection officer, Detective Sergeant James Morrison, watching from a respectful distance. He had been assigned to her security detail 6 months ago, and unlike the other guards who remained stiff and formal, James had a kind smile and gentle eyes that reminded her of her grandfather. As she reached her favorite bench beneath the old oak tree, Charlotte heard voices approaching from the main path. She recognized one immediately. Queen Camilla's distinct tone carried clearly through the morning air. Charlotte instinctively moved behind the thick trunk of the tree, not because she was trying to hide, but because she had learned that adult conversations often became uncomfortable when children were present. The child needs more discipline. Camilla's voice was sharp and cutting. Catherine coddles her far too much. Charlotte shows no proper respect for protocol, and her behavior at yesterday's luncheon was absolutely unacceptable. Charlotte's heart began to race. She pressed herself closer to the tree, her fairy tale book trembling in her hands. They were talking about her. She had attended a formal lunch with visiting dignitaries the previous day, and she thought she had done well. She had sat quietly, used the correct utensils, and only spoke when spoken to. Lady Margaret Thornfield, one of Camilla's close advisors, responded in a hushed tone. Perhaps we should speak with the Prince and Princess of Wales about adjusting her education schedule. More etiquette training might be beneficial. It's beyond etiquette, Camilla continued, her voice growing more frustrated. The girl lacks the proper understanding of her position. She acts like an ordinary child when she needs to understand the weight of her future responsibilities. Yesterday, she actually yawned during the ambassador's speech. Yawned in front of foreign dignitaries. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She remembered feeling tired during the long lunch, but she had tried so hard to stay alert. The ambassador had been speaking for what felt like hours about trade agreements, and she was only 9 years old. She had covered her mouth when she yawned, thinking no one had noticed. What do you suggest we do? Lady Margaret asked carefully. I intend to speak with Charlotte directly, Camilla declared firmly. Catherine is too soft with her, and William simply dotes on the child. Someone needs to make her understand that being a princess isn't about fairy tales and fun. It's about duty, sacrifice, and maintaining the dignity of the crown. From his position 30 meters away, Detective Sergeant Morrison noticed Charlotte's distress immediately. His trained eyes caught the slight trembling of her shoulders and the way she had pressed herself against the tree. In his 6 months of protecting the young princess, he had developed a deep respect for her resilience and kindness. She always thanked him politely, asked about his family, and once even shared her cookies with him during a long outdoor event. Morrison's jaw tightened as he heard Camilla's harsh words. He had witnessed Charlotte's behavior at numerous events, and she was remarkably well behaved for a child her age. She showed genuine interest in people, asked thoughtful questions, and always tried her best to follow protocol. The idea that she needed to be spoken to harshly about a simple yawn seemed unreasonable and cruel. As the footsteps grew closer, Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't allow a 9-year-old child to be ambushed and criticized for being human. His duty was to protect Princess Charlotte from all threats, and he was beginning to realize that sometimes those threats came from within the family itself. Charlotte wiped her tears quickly as she heard the footsteps approaching her hiding spot. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself the way her mother had taught her, but her hands continued to shake as she clutched her book, and she felt a cold fear settling in her stomach. She had always tried so hard to be good, to make everyone proud. The thought that she had disappointed the queen consort so deeply made her feel sick. The conversation had revealed something Charlotte was too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel. There were people in her own family who saw her not as a beloved granddaughter, but as a problem to be solved, a reputation to be managed. The realization was crushing for a child who had always believed that love and family were the same thing. Detective Sergeant Morrison stepped forward slightly. positioning himself with a clear view of both Charlotte's location and the approaching figures. His radio crackled softly and he adjusted his earpiece. In his calm, professional voice, he spoke quietly into his communication device. "Base, this is Morrison. I have eyes on the principal. Situation developing? May need backup for crowd control." The message was coded, but his supervisor would understand. Morrison was preparing for a confrontation, and he wanted his colleagues to be ready. He had sworn an oath to protect Princess Charlotte, and he intended to keep that promise regardless of who posed the threat. Queen Camilla rounded the corner of the garden path, her navy blue dress suit immaculate despite the morning walk. Lady Margaret followed closely behind, carrying a leather portfolio filled with the day's schedule. Camilla's expression was stern and determined, the same look she wore when addressing difficult matters of state. "Charlotte," Camilla called out sharply when she spotted the young princess near the oak tree. "Come here at once. We need to have a serious conversation." Charlotte emerged from behind the tree slowly, her book still clutched against her chest like a shield. Her eyes were red from crying, but she held her chin up the way her mother had taught her. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she said quietly, executing a perfect curtsy despite her trembling legs. Camilla's eyes narrowed as she took in Charlotte's appearance. "Have you been crying?" "Princesses do not cry in public, Charlotte. That is precisely the kind of behavior we need to discuss." Detective Sergeant Morrison felt his muscles tense. He had positioned himself closer now, close enough to intervene if necessary. His experience in protection services had taught him to read situations quickly, and everything about this encounter felt wrong. Adult confronting a distressed child in an isolated location triggered every protective instinct he possessed. "I apologize, Your Majesty," Charlotte whispered, quickly wiping her eyes. "I was just reading my book and something sad happened to the princess in the story." "Fairy tales," Camilla said dismissively. "Another problem we need to address. You're far too old for such nonsense, Charlotte. It's time you started reading biographies of real queens and learning about genuine royal responsibilities." Lady Margaret shifted uncomfortably beside Camilla. Even she seemed to recognize that the queen consort's approach was unnecessarily harsh. Charlotte was still a child after all, and fairy tales were a normal part of childhood. "Yesterday's behavior at the diplomatic luncheon was completely unacceptable," Camilla continued, her voice growing louder. "Yawning during an important speech, fidgeting with your napkin and that vacant expression on your face. Do you realize how embarrassing that was for the entire royal family?" Charlotte's lower lip began to quiver. "I tried to pay attention, Your Majesty. I really did. The ambassador was talking about very important things, but some of the words were difficult to understand." "Difficult to understand?" Camilla's voice rose sharply. "You are a princess of the United Kingdom. There is no excuse for ignorance or inattention. Your future subjects expect better from you." Morrison stepped forward, his movement deliberate and noticeable. "Excuse me, Your Majesty," he said in his calm, professional voice. "I need to conduct a security sweep of this area. There have been reports of unauthorized photographers near the perimeter." Camilla turned to face him, irritation flashing in her eyes. "Detective Sergeant Morrison, isn't it? This is a private family conversation. Surely your security sweep can wait a few minutes." "I'm afraid not, Your Majesty," Morrison replied firmly. "Princess Charlotte's safety is my primary responsibility, and I need to ensure this area is secure before she remains here any longer." The lie came easily to Morrison. There were no photographer reports, but he needed to create a distraction. He could see that Charlotte was becoming increasingly distressed, and Camilla showed no signs of moderating her harsh tone. "Charlotte," Morrison addressed the princess directly, something that made Camilla's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "Your mother asked me to escort you back to the palace for your piano lesson. She's waiting for you in the music room." Charlotte looked up at Morrison with gratitude shining in her eyes. She understood that he was offering her an escape, and she felt a rush of relief that someone was looking out for her. "But we're not finished here," Camilla protested. "Charlotte needs to understand the seriousness of her behavior and the changes that need to be made." Morrison stood straighter, his professional demeanor shifting slightly. Anyone with experience reading body language would recognize the subtle signs of a man preparing for confrontation. His feet planted firmly, shoulders squared, hands relaxed but ready. "With respect, Your Majesty," Morrison said carefully. Princess Charlotte is scheduled for educational activities this morning. As her protection officer, I'm responsible for ensuring she maintains her daily schedule as approved by the Prince and Princess of Wales. The implication was clear. Morrison was invoking the authority of Charlotte's parents over Camilla's wishes. It was a bold move that could have serious consequences for his career, but he didn't hesitate. Camilla's face flushed with anger. "Detective Sergeant, I am the Queen Consort. I don't believe you understand your place in this hierarchy." "I understand my place perfectly, Your Majesty," Morrison replied evenly. "My place is protecting Princess Charlotte from all potential harm. That includes ensuring her emotional well-being and maintaining her established routine." The tension in the garden was palpable. Lady Margaret looked extremely uncomfortable, recognizing that this confrontation had escalated far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Charlotte stood frozen between the adults, unsure of what was happening but grateful that someone was standing up for her. "This is outrageous," Camilla declared. "I will be speaking to your supervisor about this insubordination." Morrison nodded calmly. "That is certainly your right, Your Majesty. However, I believe the Prince and Princess of Wales should also be informed about this morning's events. They'll want to know about any incidents involving their daughter." The threat was subtle but effective. Morrison was suggesting that William and Catherine would not approve of Camilla's harsh treatment of their child. He was gambling that the future king and queen would support their daughter over the Queen Consort. Charlotte looked up at Morrison with complete trust. In that moment, she understood that this kind man was risking his job to protect her, and she felt safer than she had since the conversation began. The standoff in the garden continued for several tense moments. Camilla's face had turned a deep shade of red, and her hands were clenched at her sides. She was not accustomed to being challenged by palace staff, especially not in front of others. Lady Margaret stood frozen beside her, clearly wishing she could disappear from this increasingly uncomfortable situation. "Detective Sergeant Morrison," Camilla said through gritted teeth, "you are severely overstepping your boundaries. Your job is to protect Princess Charlotte from physical threats, not to interfere in family matters." Morrison remained calm despite the pressure. "Your Majesty, my training includes recognizing all forms of potential harm to those under my protection. Emotional distress can impact Princess Charlotte's well-being just as much as physical danger." Charlotte watched this exchange with wide eyes. She had never seen adults argue about her before, and certainly not someone defending her against a senior member of the royal family. Her small hand instinctively reached out and lightly touched Morrison's arm, a gesture of support and gratitude. The simple touch did not go unnoticed by any of the adults present. Camilla's eyes blazed with fury at what she perceived as Charlotte choosing sides. Lady Margaret looked increasingly worried about how this confrontation might be reported. Morrison felt the child's trust and knew he had made the right decision. "Charlotte," Camilla addressed the princess with forced calm, "go back to the palace immediately. We will continue this conversation later, and your parents will hear about your inappropriate behavior." Before Charlotte could respond, Morrison spoke up. "Princess Charlotte will return to the palace when I determine it's safe to do so. I still need to complete my security assessment of this area." The lie was becoming more elaborate, but Morrison was committed to protecting Charlotte from further emotional harm. He could see that the child was already traumatized by the harsh criticism, and allowing Camilla to continue would only make things worse. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Camilla snapped. "I am calling security immediately to have you removed from this detail." Morrison pulled out his radio calmly. "I'll be happy to contact my supervisor right now, Your Majesty. I'm sure Commander Phillips will want a full report of today's events for Princess Charlotte's protection file." The mention of Commander Phillips gave Camilla pause. The head of Royal Protection Services was known for his unwavering dedication to the safety of the royal family, particularly the children. He also reported directly to the king and had significant influence over security protocols. Charlotte tugged gently on Morrison's sleeve. "Detective Morrison," she said quietly, "I think I should go back to Mummy now. She might be worried about me." Morrison looked down at the brave little girl who was trying to defuse the situation despite her own distress. "Of course, Princess Charlotte. I'll escort you back to your parents immediately." "She doesn't need an escort for a 5-minute walk," Camilla protested. "This entire performance is unnecessary." "With respect, Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte is clearly upset." Protocol requires that I remain with her until she's safely returned to her parents or primary caregivers. Morrison's voice remained professional, but his tone made it clear that he would not be swayed. As they prepared to leave, Charlotte turned to face Camilla. Despite her fear and hurt feelings, she had been taught to be polite. "Good day, Your Majesty," she said with another small curtsy. Camilla's expression softened slightly at Charlotte's good manners, but her anger at Morrison remained evident. "Good day, Charlotte. Remember what we discussed about appropriate behavior." Morrison placed a gentle, protective hand on Charlotte's shoulder as they began walking toward the palace. "We'll take the long path through the rose garden," he said loud enough for Camilla to hear. "It's a beautiful morning for a walk." As they moved away from Camilla and Lady Margaret, Charlotte looked up at Morrison with tears in her eyes. "Am I really that bad?" she whispered.
Did I embarrass everyone yesterday?
Morrison stopped walking and knelt down to Charlotte's eye level, something that was technically against protocol but felt necessary in this moment. "Princess Charlotte, you are a wonderful, kind, intelligent little girl. You behaved perfectly at yesterday's luncheon. Anyone who expects a 9-year-old to sit through hours of diplomatic discussions without getting tired is being completely unreasonable. But I'm supposed to be different because I'm a princess," Charlotte said sadly. "Everyone expects me to be perfect all the time. Being a princess doesn't mean you're not allowed to be a child," Morrison replied gently. "Your parents understand that, and anyone who truly cares about you understands that too." Behind them, Camilla and Lady Margaret were having their own heated discussion. "This has gone too far," Lady Margaret was saying urgently. "If word of this gets back to William and Catherine, there will be serious consequences." "That security officer was completely out of line," Camilla replied, but some of her confidence was fading. "He has no right to interfere in family matters." "But was this really a family matter?" Lady Margaret asked carefully.
"Charlotte is just a child, and she was clearly distressed."
Perhaps the approach was too harsh. Camilla turned to stare at her advisor with surprise. "Are you suggesting I was wrong to correct the child's behavior?" "I'm suggesting that there might be more appropriate ways to handle these situations in the future," Lady Margaret replied diplomatically. "Ways that don't result in confrontations with protection officers." As Morrison and Charlotte continued their walk back to the palace, the little princess began to relax slightly. The morning sun felt warm on her face and the garden smelled beautiful. Morrison pointed out different flowers and asked her about her favorite colors, skillfully distracting her from the upsetting encounter. "Detective Morrison," Charlotte said as they approached the main entrance. "Will you get in trouble for helping me?" Morrison smiled down at her. "Don't worry about me, Princess Charlotte. My job is to keep you safe, and that's exactly what I did." Princess Catherine was reviewing Charlotte's weekly schedule in her private study when she heard familiar footsteps approaching down the corridor. She glanced up from her papers to see her daughter walking through the doorway with Detective Sergeant Morrison, and immediately noticed something was wrong. Charlotte's usual bright smile was absent. Her eyes were slightly red and she seemed smaller somehow, as if she was trying to make herself invisible. "Charlotte, darling," Catherine said, rising from her desk immediately. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon. How was your morning walk?" Charlotte ran directly to her mother and buried her face against Catherine's elegant blue dress. "Mummy, am I a bad princess?" she asked, her voice muffled by tears. Catherine's maternal instincts kicked in instantly. She wrapped her arms around her daughter and looked questioningly at Morrison, who maintained his professional composure but whose concerned expression told her everything she needed to know. "Detective Morrison," Catherine said carefully, "would you please tell me what happened this morning?" Morrison straightened to attention. "Your Royal Highness, Princess Charlotte encountered Queen Camilla in the gardens approximately 20 minutes ago. The conversation became quite distressing for the princess, and I felt it necessary to intervene." Catherine's grip on Charlotte tightened protectively.
What kind of conversation would distress my daughter to this extent?
The Queen Consort was expressing concerns about Princess Charlotte's behavior at yesterday's diplomatic luncheon, Morrison explained diplomatically. She felt that the princess needed to be corrected for what she considered inappropriate conduct. Catherine felt her own anger beginning to rise, but she kept her voice calm for Charlotte's sake. "And what exactly did my 9-year-old daughter do that was so inappropriate?" Charlotte looked up at her mother with tears streaming down her face. "I yawned, Mummy, during the ambassador's speech. Queen Camilla said I embarrassed the whole royal family, and that I don't understand my responsibilities. Catherine's eyes flashed with fury, but she continued speaking gently to her daughter. Oh, sweetheart, there's absolutely nothing wrong with yawning when you're tired. That ambassador spoke for nearly 2 hours about trade agreements. Even the adults were struggling to stay alert. But Queen Camilla said I need more discipline and that you're too soft with me. Charlotte continued, the words pouring out now that she felt safe. She said I act like an ordinary child when I should understand the weight of my future responsibilities. Catherine looked at Morrison with gratitude. Detective Morrison, I assume you intervened when you felt Princess Charlotte was becoming distressed? Yes, Your Royal Highness. I created a distraction and escorted Princess Charlotte away from the situation. The Queen Consort was not pleased with my intervention. Catherine stood up, gently moving Charlotte to sit in the comfortable chair beside her desk. Charlotte, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are a wonderful, perfect little girl who behaved beautifully at yesterday's luncheon. Yawning when you're tired is completely natural and nothing to be ashamed of. But I'm supposed to be different, Charlotte protested. I'm supposed to be better because I'm a princess. Being a princess doesn't mean you're not allowed to be human, Catherine said firmly, echoing Morrison's earlier words. Your father and I will always expect you to be kind, respectful, and to do your best. But we will never expect you to be something you're not, or to suppress your natural childhood needs. Morrison watched this interaction with deep respect for Catherine's parenting approach. He had seen many royal children over the years who had been damaged by excessive pressure and unrealistic expectations. Charlotte was fortunate to have parents who prioritized her emotional well-being. Detective Morrison, Catherine addressed him directly, I want to thank you for protecting my daughter this morning. Your actions were exactly what I would expect from someone in your position. It was my duty, Your Royal Highness, Morrison replied. Princess Charlotte's safety and well-being are my primary concerns. Catherine picked up her phone from the desk. I think it's time I had a conversation with my husband about this morning's events, and then we'll need to speak with His Majesty about establishing some clear boundaries regarding how our children are to be addressed by other family members. Charlotte looked up at her mother with hope in her eyes. You're not angry with me? Angry with you? Catherine knelt down beside her daughter's chair. Charlotte, I'm incredibly proud of you. You handled a very difficult situation with grace and politeness, even when someone was being unnecessarily harsh with you. Queen Camilla said I need to read biographies instead of fairy tales, Charlotte said sadly. She said fairy tales are nonsense for someone my age. Catherine's jaw tightened. Fairy tales teach us about courage, kindness, justice, and hope. They're some of the most important stories you can read at your age. We'll continue reading them together every night, just like we always have. Morrison's radio crackled softly, and he listened to a brief message through his earpiece. Your Royal Highness, he said to Catherine. I've received word that Queen Camilla has requested a meeting with my supervisor about this morning's incident. Has she indeed? Catherine replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, I think I'll be requesting a few meetings myself. Charlotte stood up and walked over to Morrison. Detective Morrison, I wanted to thank you for helping me today. You were very brave. Morrison knelt down to Charlotte's level again. Princess Charlotte, you were the brave one today. You stayed polite and respectful even when you were scared and upset. That takes real courage. Catherine watched this exchange with deep appreciation. Detective Morrison, I hope you know that you have our complete support in whatever consequences may arise from this morning's events. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. I stand by my actions completely. As Morrison prepared to leave, Catherine called him back. Detective Morrison, one more thing. I want you to know that my husband and I consider you an essential part of our daughter's protection team. Your understanding of her needs goes far beyond physical security, and we're grateful for that. After Morrison left, Catherine sat down with Charlotte and held her close. Would you like to tell me more about how you felt this morning? Charlotte nestled against her mother's shoulder. I felt scared and confused. I thought I had been trying so hard to be good, but Queen Camilla made me feel like I was doing everything wrong. You are doing everything right, my darling, Catherine assured her. And no one has the right to make you feel otherwise. Prince William was in the middle of reviewing constitutional documents when his private secretary knocked urgently on his office door. Sir, Princess Catherine is here to see you. She says it's extremely urgent regarding Princess Charlotte. William immediately set aside his papers and stood up. Send her in right away. Catherine entered the office with determination written across her face, carrying Charlotte's fairy tale book that she had retrieved from the garden. William could tell instantly that his wife was furious about something, and when Catherine was truly angry, it was usually for very good reason. "William, we need to talk about what happened to Charlotte this morning," Catherine said without preamble. "And then we need to have a very serious conversation with your father about family boundaries." William guided Catherine to the comfortable seating area near the window. "Tell me everything." Catherine recounted the morning's events in detail, from Charlotte's distressed return to the confrontation in the garden. William's expression grew darker with each detail, his hands clenching into fists when Catherine described Camilla's harsh criticism of their daughter. "She said what to a 9-year-old child?" William's voice was dangerously quiet. "She criticized Charlotte for yawning during a 2-hour diplomatic presentation." "It gets worse," Catherine continued. "She told Charlotte that fairy tales are nonsense, that I'm too soft with her, and that she needs to understand the weight of her responsibilities." "William, she made our daughter cry and question whether she's a good person." William stood up abruptly and began pacing. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Charlotte is a child, not a diplomatic robot. She behaved perfectly at that luncheon, better than most adults would have managed. Detective Morrison had to intervene to protect her," Catherine added. "He literally put his career on the line to shield Charlotte from further emotional harm. Camilla is now trying to have him disciplined for insubordination. Morrison will receive a commendation, not discipline," William declared firmly. "He did exactly what we pay him to do, protect our daughter from harm. The fact that the harm was coming from within the family doesn't make it less serious." Catherine pulled out her phone. "I've already spoken to Charlotte's therapist. Dr. Sarah wants to see her this afternoon to make sure this incident doesn't create any lasting anxiety about royal duties." William stopped pacing and looked at his wife with admiration. "You've thought of everything. What else do we need to do?" "We need to speak with your father immediately," Catherine replied. "This isn't just about one incident. This is about establishing clear boundaries about how our children are treated by other family members. If Camilla feels entitled to ambush Charlotte with harsh criticism, what's next?" William nodded grimly. "You're absolutely right. And we need to make it clear that anyone who has concerns about our children's behavior should bring those concerns to us, not confront the children directly." Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly and her expression hardened. "It's from my private secretary. Camilla has requested a formal meeting with us this afternoon to discuss Charlotte's behavioral issues and what she calls the inappropriate intervention by security staff." "Has she now?" William's voice carried the authority that came with being the future king. "Well, she'll get her meeting, but it won't go the way she expects." There was another knock on the office door, and William's private secretary entered. "Sir, His Majesty's office has called. The king would like to see you and Princess Catherine at your earliest convenience. Apparently there's been some sort of incident involving Princess Charlotte and security." William and Catherine exchanged knowing looks. News traveled fast in the palace, and King Charles had obviously heard some version of the morning's events. "Tell my father we'll see him in 20 minutes, William instructed, "and ask Detective Morrison to join us. I want him to give his first-hand account of what happened." As they prepared to leave for the meeting with the king, Catherine took William's hand. "I'm proud of how you're handling this. Charlotte needs to know that her parents will always protect her. She's our daughter and she's a child," William replied firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Detective Sergeant Morrison was meeting with Commander Phillips, the head of Royal Protection Services. Phillips was a seasoned professional who had spent decades protecting the royal family, and he understood both the complexities of palace politics and the paramount importance of the children's welfare. "Morrison, I've received a complaint about your conduct this morning," Phillips began. "Tell me your side of the story." Morrison provided a detailed, professional account of the morning's events, emphasizing his assessment of Princess Charlotte's emotional distress and his decision to intervene based on his duty to protect her from all forms of harm. Phillips listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Morrison finished, the commander leaned back in his chair. "Morrison, in your professional opinion, was Princess Charlotte in emotional distress?" "Absolutely, sir. She was crying, trembling, and clearly frightened. The situation was escalating, and I felt immediate intervention was necessary. And you believe your actions were justified under your protective mandate? Completely, sir. My primary duty is to protect Princess Charlotte. That includes protecting her from emotional harm when it occurs in my presence. Phillips nodded slowly. Morrison, I want you to know that you have my full support. Your actions this morning were exemplary. You recognized a threat to Princess Charlotte's well-being and responded appropriately. Morrison felt a wave of relief. Thank you, sir. However, Phillips continued, you should be prepared for some political fallout. The Queen Consort is not accustomed to being challenged by security staff. But don't worry about that. The Prince and Princess of Wales have already expressed their complete support for your actions. Back in William's office, Catherine was helping Charlotte with her afternoon snack when Morrison arrived for the meeting with the king. Charlotte immediately brightened when she saw him. Detective Morrison, she called out happily. Mummy told me you're not in trouble for helping me. Morrison smiled warmly at the little princess. That's right, Princess Charlotte. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following every rule. Charlotte considered this wisdom seriously, like when someone is being mean to a person who can't defend themselves. Exactly like that, Morrison confirmed. William watched this interaction with deep respect for Morrison's character. The man understood instinctively what it meant to serve and protect, not just as a job but as a moral calling. King Charles was standing by the tall windows of his private study when William, Catherine, and Detective Morrison were announced. His expression was thoughtful rather than angry, which both surprised and relieved his son. The king had heard multiple versions of the morning's events and wanted to understand exactly what had transpired. Please, sit down. Charles gestured to the comfortable chairs arranged around a small coffee table. Detective Morrison, I understand you had quite an eventful morning. Morrison remained standing at attention. Yes, Your Majesty. I felt it necessary to intervene in a situation that was causing Princess Charlotte significant emotional distress. And this intervention has caused some controversy, Charles observed mildly. The Queen Consort feels that her authority was undermined by security staff. William's jaw tightened. But before he could speak, Catherine placed a gentle hand on his arm and addressed the king directly. Your Majesty, with respect, this isn't about authority or protocol. This is about a 9-year-old child who is being subjected to harsh criticism for completely normal childhood behavior. Charles nodded slowly. Catherine, please tell me exactly what Charlotte told you about this morning's conversation. Catherine recounted Charlotte's account in detail, watching as her father-in-law's expression grew increasingly concerned. When she mentioned that Charlotte had asked if she was a bad princess, Charles visibly winced. Detective Morrison, Charles addressed the protection officer, what was your assessment of Princess Charlotte's emotional state during this encounter? Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte was clearly distressed. She was crying, trembling, and had withdrawn behind a tree. When the Queen Consort approached her, the child's distress escalated significantly. I observed what I can only describe as fear in Princess Charlotte's demeanor. Charles was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. William, what are your thoughts on this situation? William chose his words carefully, though his anger was evident. Father, I believe there are serious boundary issues here. Charlotte is our daughter, and any concerns about her behavior should be addressed to Catherine and me, not directly to a child who cannot defend herself. Moreover, Catherine added, the behavior being criticized was completely appropriate for a child her age. Expecting a 9-year-old to maintain perfect attention through hours of diplomatic discussions is unreasonable and potentially harmful. Charles walked back to the window, looking out at the gardens where the incident had occurred. I've been thinking about my own childhood, he said quietly. The pressure, the expectations, the constant criticism. I remember how frightening it could be when adults seemed angry with me for simply being a child. William and Catherine exchanged glances, understanding that Charles was reflecting on his own difficult childhood experiences within the royal family. Detective Morrison, Charles continued, you put your career at risk to protect my granddaughter's emotional well-being. I want you to know that I consider your actions not only appropriate but commendable. Morrison straightened with relief. Thank you, Your Majesty. However, Charles turned back to face the group. We need to address this situation carefully. Camilla feels humiliated by what she perceives as public insubordination. We need to find a way forward that protects Charlotte while also maintaining family harmony. William's expression hardened. Father, with respect, maintaining family harmony cannot come at the expense of our children's emotional well-being. If Camilla cannot interact with Charlotte in an age-appropriate manner, then perhaps her interactions with our children need to be limited. Charles was surprised by the firmness in his son's voice. William was clearly prepared to create a serious family rift over this issue. What do you propose? Charles asked. Catherine spoke up. We propose that any future concerns about our children's behavior be brought directly to William and me. No child should be subjected to harsh criticism from any adult family member without their parents present. Additionally, William added, Detective Morrison and the entire protection team should know that they have our full support in intervening whenever they perceive emotional harm to our children. Regardless of who is causing that harm, Charles considered these proposals, and if Camilla disagrees with these boundaries, then Camilla will need to choose between respecting our parenting decisions or having limited access to our children, William replied without hesitation. There was a soft knock on the door, and the king's private secretary entered. Your Majesty, the Queen Consort is here for her scheduled meeting regarding this morning's incident. Charles looked at his son and daughter-in-law. Are you prepared to have this conversation with Camilla present? Absolutely, Catherine replied firmly. Charlotte deserves to have her parents advocate for her. When Camilla entered the room, her demeanor was formal and somewhat defensive. She had clearly prepared for this meeting as if it were a diplomatic negotiation rather than a family discussion. Charles, she began, I hope you understand the serious breach of protocol that occurred this morning. That security officer completely overstepped his authority and undermined my position within the family. William stood up immediately. Camilla, before we discuss Detective Morrison's actions, I think we need to discuss your decision to confront our 9-year-old daughter with harsh criticism for normal childhood behavior. Camilla's eyes flashed with surprise at William's direct challenge. Charlotte needs to understand her responsibilities. Yesterday's behavior at the diplomatic luncheon was inappropriate for a princess. What specifically was inappropriate? Catherine asked, her voice calm but steely. Please describe exactly what our daughter did wrong. Camilla seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. She yawned during an important speech. She appeared bored and inattentive, and she clearly wasn't taking the event seriously. Charles spoke quietly but firmly. Camilla, she's 9 years old. 9-year-olds yawn when they're tired. They appear bored during 2-hour speeches about trade agreements because they are bored. These are not character flaws requiring correction. The room fell silent as Camilla realized that she did not have the support she had expected from the king. Her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. So you're all going to support the insubordination of security staff over the authority of the Queen Consort? She asked incredulously. Morrison stepped forward slightly. Your Majesty, with permission, I'd like to address that directly. Charles nodded to Morrison. Please, Detective Morrison, speak freely. Morrison stood straight and spoke with quiet dignity. Your Majesty, my oath as a protection officer is to safeguard the members of the royal family from all forms of harm. This includes physical threats, security risks, and situations that could cause emotional or psychological damage. When I observed Princess Charlotte in obvious distress, with tears streaming down her face and her small body trembling with fear, I recognized a clear threat to her well-being. He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. The source of that threat is irrelevant to my duty. Whether it comes from a stranger, a photographer, or a member of the royal family, my responsibility remains the same: to protect Princess Charlotte. I would make the same decision again without hesitation. Camilla's face had grown pale during Morrison's speech. For the first time, she seemed to understand how her actions had appeared to others. William stepped closer to Camilla. Morrison did his job perfectly. He protected our daughter when she couldn't protect herself. The question now is whether you can accept that your approach this morning was inappropriate. Catherine joined her husband. Camilla, Charlotte came home asking if she was a bad princess. A 9-year-old child questioned her own worth because of how she was spoken to this morning. That's not acceptable, regardless of your intentions. King Charles watched this confrontation with deep sadness. He could see that Camilla was struggling with the realization that her attempt to help had instead caused harm. But he also recognized that his son and daughter-in-law were absolutely right to protect their child. Camilla, Charles said gently, I think we need to acknowledge that the approach taken this morning was too harsh for a child Charlotte's age. Camilla sat down heavily in one of the chairs, her defensive posture finally cracking. I just wanted her to understand the importance of her role. The media watches everything she does, and I thought, you thought like an adult dealing with adult problems, Catherine interrupted softly. But Charlotte isn't an adult. She's a little girl who's trying her best to learn how to be a princess while still being allowed to be a child. William sat down across from Camilla, his anger giving way to something approaching understanding. Camilla, we appreciate that you care about Charlotte's future and the reputation of the monarchy, but our children's emotional well-being will always be our top priority. What happened this morning can never happen again, Catherine added firmly. If you have concerns about our children's behavior, you bring them to us. You don't confront a child with criticism they can't understand or defend against. Camilla looked around the room, finally understanding that she was completely isolated in her position. Even Charles, her husband, was supporting William and Catherine's stance. I may have been too direct, she admitted reluctantly. But surely you understand that Charlotte needs to learn. Charlotte is learning every day, William interrupted. She's learning kindness, empathy, duty, and responsibility. But she's learning these things at an age-appropriate pace with the support and guidance of people who love her unconditionally. Morrison had remained silent during this family discussion, but now he cleared his throat respectfully. Your Majesty, if I may, Princess Charlotte showed remarkable grace under pressure this morning. Despite being frightened and upset, she remained polite and respectful. Those are the qualities of someone who will make an excellent future leader. Charles smiled at Morrison's observation. Detective Morrison is absolutely right. Charlotte's behavior this morning demonstrated exactly the kind of character we want to see in our future royals. Grace under pressure, kindness in the face of criticism, and trust in those who are there to protect her. Camilla finally looked directly at William and Catherine. What do you want me to do? Catherine's expression softened slightly. We want you to apologize to Charlotte. She needs to hear that she did nothing wrong this morning and that the adults around her were having a disagreement that had nothing to do with her behavior. And we want your word that any future concerns about our children will be brought to us privately, William added. Our children should never be made to feel that they're disappointing the family. Camilla nodded slowly. I can do that. Charles stood up, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. Detective Morrison, I want to personally thank you for your service to our family. Your actions this morning exemplify the very best of what we expect from our protection staff. Morrison bowed respectfully. Thank you, Your Majesty. Protecting Princess Charlotte is both a duty and an honor. As they prepared to leave, Catherine turned back to Camilla. Would you like to come with us to speak with Charlotte now? I think it would mean a lot to her to hear from you directly. Camilla hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. 20 minutes later, they found Charlotte in the nursery, reading her fairy tale book to her younger brother Louis. When she saw the group of adults enter, her face showed a moment of worry before she saw her parents' reassuring smiles. Charlotte, William said gently, Queen Camilla would like to speak with you. Camilla knelt down to Charlotte's level, something she rarely did with the children. Princess Charlotte, I owe you an apology. This morning I spoke to you in a way that was too harsh and made you feel bad about yourself. That was wrong of me. Charlotte looked at her parents, who nodded encouragingly. It's okay, Queen Camilla. Detective Morrison said sometimes adults make mistakes too. Detective Morrison was very wise, Camilla replied. You are a wonderful little princess and you behaved beautifully at yesterday's luncheon. I hope you'll forgive me for making you feel otherwise. Charlotte's generous heart immediately responded to the sincere apology. I forgive you, Queen Camilla, and I promise I'll try even harder to be a good princess. Catherine knelt down beside her daughter. Charlotte, you don't need to try harder. You're already perfect exactly as you are. As they watched this reconciliation, Morrison felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that his decision to protect Princess Charlotte had led to this moment of healing and understanding. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons but with courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The fairy tale book lay open beside Charlotte, its pages filled with stories of brave knights and protective guardians. In real life, Detective Morrison had proven that such heroes truly existed, ready to stand up for those who needed protection, regardless of the personal cost.